Welcome to Fiber MB, a podcast highlighting non binary fiber artists, where fiber arts meets gender. Today on our podcast, we have Annie with us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. So glad to have you here. And so we're just going to do our demographic questions first.
All right.
So obviously, we got your name and your pronouns. You wrote they, them. Any other ones you like to use?
Nope, sticking with they, them for now.
Very straightforward, easy to work with.
Yeah. I did the multiple pronoun thing at one point and I just kept getting she, heard, and I was like, this is so obnoxious. So I was just like, no, it's strictly they, them, nothing else.
I've heard that from so many people who still use binary pronouns that everybody just defaults to those anyway.
Yeah. So I was like, I'm having none of this. So if you're not willing to use multiple, then you are stuck with one, and it's going to be the one that makes most people the most uncomfortable.
Fair enough. I'm currently writing three sets of pronouns, and
Okay.
yeah, everybody still always defaults to they, them because my others are a
Hmm.
neo pronoun and actually a pronoun in Mi'kmaq. So,
Oh, interesting. Do you mind sharing what they are? I'm not familiar with.
yeah, the neo pronoun that I use is z, them, zir.
Okay. Yeah, I have heard that one.
And then in Mi'kmaq, the pronoun, and the great thing about this is you don't conjugate, you just use negum. You just say negum.
Oh, I love that. Ah, see, indigenous languages are so much just like right there.
Yeah, some things
I
are
love
so
that.
much easier to deal with, and some things are just a little confusing from,
Mm.
my standpoint of growing up in like a noun-based language when I'm trying to learn a verb-based language.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. That would be tricky for sure.
Anyway, sorry, that's a tangent.
Yeah, I can talk about pronouns for ages.
I mean, it's not that much of a tangent, but back to you.
Okay. It's related.
Yeah. Can I ask your age if you'd like to give it?
Yeah, it is 29.
And what is the term that you use for your gender identity?
I use non-binary most of the time. I've recently started I like started describing myself as trans. So kind of like trans non-binary is how I would describe my gender. Yeah.
And for fiber art, I noticed that you had, I think, like five written down here. Yeah. So knitting, weaving, spinning, sewing, and natural dyeing.
Hmm.
So that's, quite a breadth of different options.
Yes, those are not the only ones. Those are kind of the like main ones. They're like I crochet, I do some embroidering. I've also dabbled a bit in like paper making. I don't know if that's kind of like fiber adjacent. It's paper, it's a fibrous material. Yeah, kind of just like I love experimenting. I love trying new things. So I've just collected a very vast repertoire of skills over my life, and it's a lot of fun.
I completely understand that. You just see a new thing and you're like, that's shiny. I want to learn how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And too with fiber arts, I feel like like they all require very different skill sets. They're like related enough that I feel like my confidence in one makes me feel like I could learn how to do another one, if that makes sense, which is like sometimes misguided and I get frustrated and all of that. But yeah, it's like, oh, this involves something that I'm familiar with, so I feel like I can kind of muddle my way through it or like look up YouTube tutorials and figure it out. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I know. I understand what you mean because, like, I can embroider. It is one of my things, but more often I'm going to do cross stitch. And it's like, I don't know. I just have preference for this whole one stitch over and over again versus all of the options or something, even though they're
Hmm.
connected.
Yeah, and sort of similar materials, similar techniques, but
Yeah,
very different results.
exactly.
Yeah.
So let's go back into your history a bit. When
Okay.
did you
Oh,
first?
that's
Hi,
my
kitty.
hi cat. Excuse me. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I completely understand. That's why I'm not at my house right now because my two dogs would be in my face constantly.
Fair. Yep.
Okay, so back in your history a bit, when did you
Mhm.
first begin doing your fiber crafts? And you can like go through them one by one or just kind of like give a general idea, whatever's easier.
Yeah. So I came to them all at very different points in my life, but I feel like because I was very fortunate to grow up in a family where there's so many crafts people in my family, so it felt very natural when I to kind of pick it up. It was just around me, so it felt very natural. I first learned how to knit. My grandmother taught me, and I was young enough that I don't have very clear memories of actually like sitting down with her and her showing me. But I do have this, it would have been the first thing that her and I knit together. She mostly knit it because it's just this like random chunk of knitted fabric that is too short. It's like too small to be anything. And most of it is knit perfectly. And then there's these odd sections that are just riddled with mistakes. So much that I've had to like go back and kind of stitch them up to prevent the whole thing from unraveling. And so I didn't at first clue in to what this was. And then suddenly I was like, oh, this would have been the piece of material that my grandmother taught me how to knit on, because it's very clear that an experienced knitter did most of it. And then there's just little sections where I was obviously learning and making numerous mistakes. So that was knitting, which I kind of just like picked up here and there. Like I would just see something that I wanted to try and make. I didn't really get into following patterns until a lot later. I would just kind of like, I don't know. I was really into like fingerless gloves as a kid at one point, or like so I would experiment with making things like that. And then I guess sewing would have been the thing that came next. I have an aunt who is a master quilter. Like she has made like in volume, and also just the complexity and beauty of the stuff that she makes is like just awe-inspiring. So she taught me how to sew. So I did some quilting with her, and then that kind of bloomed into making my own clothing. I was really into like fantasy as a child as well. So I would make usually using like I don't know, like I remember one time I turned an old t-shirt of my dad's into like a hobbit tunic or something. So like very much just like playing around, exploring, doing a lot of dress up type stuff. So that really fueled my love of sewing. And again, that was kind of something that I just sort of carried with me throughout life. And then about 3 years ago, I had come home. I was like studying, but moved home for a bit during the lockdown when everything was virtual. And there's this really amazing fiber art store in the town that I was living in, which I actually work there now. Sisterhood Fibers. They opened a different location, and so I've been working there. But anyways, at the time they were just out in Tatamagouche, and they offer workshops. And there was that summer they were offering an intro to spinning and an intro to weaving workshop. And I took them both and fell absolutely in love with weaving. Like I finished the workshop and like it immediately talked to the owner about buying a loom because I just fell in love with it. So I've been doing that off and on, kind of trying to experiment with sort of seeing what I can do with, because I'm still a beginner. Like I don't really know that much in terms of like different techniques and stuff, but just trying to kind of play with it and see what I can do within sort of the basics that I already know. And then spinning was just like magic. I like of anything that I've ever done, spinning feels the most like magic because you're literally just taking raw fluff and turning it into beautiful yarn that you can then make whatever out of. So that I don't have a spinning wheel, but I have a little drop spindle and I just pull it out every now and then and play around. And then for the natural dyeing, I don't really know when that started. I think it was kind of when I started learning how to spin, then I was like, oh, I want to be able to dye this. So then I didn't want to spend a bunch of money and buy a bunch of chemical dyes. So I was like, oh, what can I use to dye yarn that's just around me? And, the internet is amazing for finding all sorts of fun things. So it was like onion skins, avocado peels, those kinds of stuff. And just, again, just very, very experimental, playing around. Yeah, that was long-winded. There's
That's
just
okay.
so many.
No, and like that's what we're all here for is to hear this detail, right? So, but let's see how my ADHD keeps me in track here. Trying to,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, so first of all, the knitting. I love that your like kind of beginner piece was a collaborative with your grandmother. That is the sweetest
Yeah.
thing.
It's like one of my most treasured possessions.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I'd hold on to it forever too. It's like I don't know what I'm gonna do with it, but I can't let go of it.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
I know, like when my mom taught me, I don't remember touching her needles. But then
Right.
again, just like, she was making presents and stuff, and I just kind of
Mm,
tagged into what she was doing. So,
right.
but yeah, like a lot of people I hear about not letting kids touch their needles, or if they do let them do a few stitches, they undo them and come back or whatever. So it's really
Yeah.
sweet that your grandmother like specifically made that with you.
Yeah. And I can imagine it too, like, because I was so young that I don't really remember like that experience with her. But I can imagine too, like, I'm sure she sometimes got frustrated with me or I got frustrated with it. And so she was like, okay, I'll take it for a bit.
Definitely. It's like, oh
Um,
no, just sit and watch me for a minute. Like,
yeah,
let me show you
exactly.
again. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very treasured for sure.
So, like, I see what you mean too about I don't know a lot of complicated things in weaving, but even with all I'm extremely low. I don't know much about weaving. I took one class, but like, even just learning about all the different types of yarn, what they do, the colors and stuff like that, there's so much you can do even with those extreme basics.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I think is what one of the things that really drew me to weaving was that like with same as you, I've taken one class, but there's so much you can do and like you can make very impressive functional things just with the basics. So I think that was really felt really good to be like, oh, I can just start out with something and be making beautiful things right from the get-go. So that was really, really fun about weaving for sure.
Yeah, my first little weaving project, like your knitting one, was too short to really do anything with. So it's not quite long enough for a table runner or a scarf or anything. But I'm just like, look, I made it.
Mhm.
So it just hangs
Yeah.
on a door.
Yeah, exactly. No, I have the same thing. I'm just like I think it's yeah, it's like too small to be anything, but it's still like I did this with my hands.
Yeah, like I completed a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. It's a thing that exists.
You were saying like when you did the natural dyeing and you looked online and you found, you could use onion skins and avocado pits and stuff like that. Were you as surprised as I was by how much is just garbage that you throw away, like your compost and stuff you can use?
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, I was blown away by like how simple dye materials can be. Like when you break it down, it's like it's mostly about the tannins and again, I don't know a lot about, but like the actual science, like the dye process relies heavily on tannins
Hmm.
in whatever you're using. So things like tea or yeah, onion skins or all of these things that we just have around. Like, I think I thought of dyeing as this incredibly science, which disclaimer, it is a very scientific process, but there are ways of doing it that are incredibly simple. And that really surprised me. And it's fun. It's like, I'm like, could I dye with this? You find random things and you're like, oh, maybe.
Yeah, like I feel like things like berries feel pretty obvious because like if you're working with strawberries, even just cutting them, you get that little red stain on your hand. So you're like, oh, of course this would stain fabric. But then you're like,
Mhm.
onions don't do anything.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think that comes down to like what actually is in the thing. Like which is just so fascinating. It's like food science almost, but it's for an entirely different thing, which is yeah, it's fascinating.
I swear this is one of those things where I just kind of like look at it and I'm like, there's so many steps you had to figure out to get this to work because you need like
Mm.
acids and salts and stuff too in the process. And I'm just like, who thought that they were going to try this and started like throwing things in a pot and boiling them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's such a like coming back to that example of like the strawberries, like I think about that of how exactly that, like when did these at whatever point in history, in like ancient history, when people realized that they could use whatever random organic materials to create and like not necessarily impact the functionality of a garment, but
Hmm.
to decorate it and make it beautiful and personal. And just thinking about like, my brain does that a lot of like, who was the first person to realize that you could do this? And what was the sort of, like, was it an accidental discovery? Was it like, was it like, I don't know. I could see something happening with tea, like someone getting fabric in tea and then realizing that it stained it. I don't know, but yeah, it's cool to think about.
It really is because this is like a long history of stuff. It's not things that started
Yeah.
happening when we could do like, what is that called? Like mass spectrometry and all this kind of stuff. Like when we have fancy science machines to figure it out.
Yeah, well, exactly. In a lot of cultures, textile production would have predated recorded history. So I feel like there's so much that we just, that like processes and ideas and concepts that just exist because they were, and no one can really like fully trace them back to their like true origin because they predated things being written down and it was all just oral and skill based that these in a lot of cases sort of survival skills were passed down and then built upon and altered and evolved as everything does throughout history and now we can knit like I don't know dinosaur shaped stuffies.
Yes, we've come to like the most, what's what I'm looking for? Peak silliness. Like, yes, let's make dinosaur plushies. I'm here for it. Or
Yeah,
even better,
absolutely.
the dinosaur nuggy plushies.
Nuggy, what makes
The
them nuggy?
chicken nuggets.
Oh my God.
There are people who have made patterns for like the chicken nuggets, and you buy like the brown fuzzy blankie yarn and make it.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Okay, sorry, tangent again. Okay, so let's go to what's your favorite thing about the media that you use?
Ooh, so many different things.
Yeah, you can go one by one if that's easier.
Well, I think just kind of generally something that I love about all fiber arts, and that's why I do so many, is because it is so versatile. Like they're within this umbrella, there are so many different art forms that kind of overlap and complement each other and sometimes use very similar materials or techniques. So that I find really, really wonderful because as a person with a non-neurotypical brain, I've not been diagnosed as neurodivergent, but the signs are there. So I feel like that's one thing that fiber arts really help with is giving me a diversity of things that I can engage my time in at any given point. I can be like, oh, I feel like crocheting today, or here's this project that would be really well suited to knitting, or and then the constant struggle of always having a million projects on the go already, which is so it's very easy to just pick something up and work on it for a couple of hours. But more specifically, knitting, well, like any kind of like garment construction, so like knitting, sewing, those kinds of things. I love that I can make things for me, that they're so customizable that it's totally individual to what I want. Like I can choose the color, the shape, the fiber content, all of these different things to an extent. Like I'm not gonna, I don't know, I'm not the best at going off pattern yet, but there's a lot of kind of flexibility within that. And, being someone who doesn't fit into a binary gender category, it's very common for me to go clothing shopping and not see anything that really feels like me. So to be able to make things that feel like me is really incredibly empowering. And that's definitely something that I love knitting and sewing for. And I think with weaving and spinning particularly, like I said, it really it just feels like magic. I don't know. I don't know how else to describe it. Like there are days when I'll be like having not so great of a mental health day and just feeling generally kind of chaotic. And I'm like, I need to do something that will make me feel like the world makes sense. And I will spin because it feels like magic to me. I don't know. It just like it makes things feel better in my brain. And so that's why I love spinning. And yeah, weaving is kind of similar that you're just taking all of this pile of string and turning it into a piece of cloth. Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you mean about like just being able to pick up things and, whatever your brain just feels like today. It's like that's the satisfying thing. We're gonna go do this one today.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like it's not just kind of sticking with one thing that you can, yeah, kind of pick and choose. And like, I don't know if this is true for you, but do you knit? Actually, I don't, I'm
Yep, I do.
okay. Yeah. I was like, I feel like you've talked about it on previous podcasts, but I'm sure I don't know if you do this or you've heard other people talk about this, how they will usually have at least two knitting projects on the go, one that's super simple and easy and one that's a bit more complex and involved. So like depending on where your brain is at, you can go to one or the other. It's like that kind of thing. It's like, you can pick what makes sense for your brain and your kind of energy level that day.
Yeah, I do that. I keep like a basic project in the house so my day job is researcher, which means sometimes I end up on the computer doing a lot of reading. So if I need to keep my
Mm.
hands busy but not my eyes, since I can knit without looking, I just keep a basic shawl
Ah,
nearby to work on.
amazing.
And then when I feel like it, I have a more complicated pattern that admittedly I haven't touched in a while and I really need to get back to, but it's there.
Yeah, yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I do the same thing. And then there's always like a background project that has just been sitting in a bag or a basket for a while.
Yeah, the more complicated knitting project, I think I started it New Year's Day 2022, 2023.
Okay, what is it?
Did you see, I can't remember the designer's name, but the Blue Brick yarn shop got famous because they paired their yarns with this designer's knit shawl that was all like really detailed feathers.
Oh, I did not see that, but that sounds beautiful.
Okay, I'll see if I can find it and send it to you after the podcast. But that's what I'm
Yeah.
working on, and it's a
Okay.
lot of like there's multiple feathers down each side. I want to say there's probably 10 of them, so you have to keep track of your numbers really well.
Right.
Yeah.
Oof. Yeah, that anything that involves a lot of like counting and keeping track is very tricky. I recently finished up a lace shawl, like a triangle kind of wrap shawl thing, and it was like a pretty basic lace pattern, but it was the first time I had ever done lace, and it was a really like a sit down and focus kind of project, but very satisfying.
That's the best part though, is when you come out, especially after you block it, because lace always looks so
Mm,
frumpy beforehand with all of its
yeah.
like wanting to clump together.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely very satisfying, but yeah, easy to forget about, I guess, or just move on to other things.
Especially when sewn mine because it is like 10 feathers per side or whatever. You have like your stitch markers and it's like, oh, do this, knit to this, do this, knit to, and I'm like, okay, so how many stitches am I supposed to have on each one? Because like the
Mm,
number changes as the feather gets wider, so they don't put it in everything because they're just telling you to repeat the row.
right.
And then I'm like, oh, there's 9 stitches on this feather, but 10 on the next one. And damn it, I think I screwed up.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's so true. I ran into the that exact same problem and with the lace piece that I was knitting, and my solution was that I wrote down for myself what the stitch count was on each row. I was like, okay, in front here it changes from 10 to 13 stitches between your stitch markers. So I wouldn't freak out when I counted and was like, oh no.
Some sweet blessed person when this pattern came out did that and like
Ah,
yeah,
beautiful.
so you can go and find it pretty easily. The person who made the pattern attached the information so that you can find it. So
Oh, that's great. Yeah, blessings.
very much so. Okay, so you work at a fiber arts shop, a knitting shop.
Yes.
So do you have like a fiber arts group there you go to, or are there any other in-person or online ones you are a part of?
So there aren't Sisterhood Fibers doesn't like officially kind of have a fiber group, but they do host weekly, call them fiber drop-ins. Mainly folks who come are knitters, but we've had rug hookers, weavers, spinners come as well. So just anyone can come and work on whatever projects they're working on. It's not like a formal group necessarily, but there are a lot of people who come on a regular basis. So you kind of build that community that way, which is really, really lovely. Yeah. So that, and my, like for myself, I'm not involved in anything. I feel like working at the shop has been enough of a fiber community that I kind of get that community aspect there, which is really nice.
That's fair. And then it's like, oh no, I'm off the clock. I'm going home. I'm done. I've
Yes, I'm
peopled
done.
enough.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's fair. Because, like, if you've been dealing with actually working with fiber arts all day and chatting with people, like, I imagine the draw is not there the same way.
No, but I think like I think there definitely is a lot of value in fiber related groups, and I would like to be more a part of other groups, especially like I don't know, queer specific fiber groups. I think would be really nice to kind of have that additional kind of layer of community there as well.
Yeah, that's fair. The knitting group in the knitting store here isn't specifically queer oriented, but because they kind of, I wouldn't say they orient the hangouts necessarily towards the students, but they have like beginner classes regularly that are geared towards the students. And then a lot of students come by. I feel like
Mm,
because it does tend to run younger
right.
from the university, that it does just kind of lean queer feeling, even if it's not
Mm,
necessarily.
right. Yeah. No, I love that. And it's like you kind of have a sense that it's like not necessarily that everyone who is there is queer, but there's a sense of like this is a queer supportive space and everyone's kind of on the same page a bit more, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. This town, it's an interesting little blip in the area and it's odd demographics. So my understanding is because the university is so many students, that come in
Mm,
compared to the size of the town. And then
right.
a lot of students actually end up retiring in the town later.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so like the demographics of people run very interestingly around here, where there is a higher, I think there's a higher demographic of older ages, but they tend to be more liberal because they came from the university and stuff. So
Huh.
yeah,
Huh.
it's weird.
Interesting. Yeah, like a multi-generational university town.
Yeah, so it's really nice though, because you tend to run into a lot of pretty chill people around this town. So.
Nice.
Okay, the next question is, do you use your art to express yourself in regards to your gender?
Yes. But not in I would say in like a more subtle and almost more like philosophical way than like necessarily kind of the explicit like stating of I am non-binary. So like but I think my approach to making art is very queer, if that makes sense, where I find that I am often drawn to doing things in a way that is not maybe considered technically correct. I just don't like following rules. I find there's a lot of like arbitrary rules within different fiber arts and or like kind of standard ways of doing things or like always necessarily following a pattern. Like I'm sort of branching out into like freestyle knitting, trying to push myself. And so I think that kind of approach is inherently queer, if that makes sense. Like that I'm not like I was making this, I'll give an example because I feel like it illustrates this more so than me trying to like have cohesive words. But I was working on this piece that's it's like my first attempt at weaving something and then sewing it together to create a garment. And it turned out really well. I was really happy with the final result. And as I was working on it, I was getting a little frustrated with myself because I was like, oh, like the pieces that I wove they weren't perfectly even. And so it took a little bit of fudging to kind of get them to fit together. And I was like, oh, this isn't like a very precise or technical garment. And then I had this thought of like, well, I'm not a very precise or technical person. So why would I make a precise and technical garment for myself? So in that way, I feel like I was able to not only express my gender, but express this kind of like fundamental part of who I am as a person, if that makes sense, through the art without necessarily saying, oh, this piece is about queerness, but in the way that I approach it and my motivation behind it is influenced by my queerness.
Yeah, like instead of trying to make the fabric itself fit the standard, you were like, why is the standard important?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like, why do I need each piece, like each panel to be exactly the same length? Like, so it's off by like a centimeter. I can still wear it. It still looks cool. Realistically, no one's going to notice. And like, I'm not perfectly symmetrical either. So,
Yeah, the chances of you even being in a position where something like a centimeter difference on a hem is going to be super noticeable anyway.
well, exactly. Because it's a super like loose kind of like shrug on type garment. So it's never going to lay evenly on my body anyway. It's like a scarf almost.
Exactly. And then even if you had gotten it perfectly even while it's flat, you are a curved human. We are not
Well,
flat
yeah,
creatures.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. No, and that's I think that's really what the when the word precise came into my mind, that's really what I was thinking about was like I am not a precise person. And yeah, like there are curves and also something that's interesting. This is like kind of a tangent, but I think is related to queerness and art is where the fact that I do make a lot of garments and that's kind of a big focus of a lot of my fiber arts. But I'm recently found out that I was approved for gender affirming top surgery. So that's very exciting. But then with that in mind, I'm like, oh, my body is going to radically change within the next year. So all of the garments that I'm making kind of have to be with that in mind, which is really interesting to kind of think about like these changes and how that's reflected in our art and how we can make art to accommodate those changes and celebrate them, I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, there's a cosplayer that I follow online who was talking about this in a recent video. So Lee is an AFAB non-binary human who is also seeking top surgery and then was like trying to figure out how to do the top part of a dress that they were making. And they kept
Right.
like stumbling over why it didn't look right. And they were like, oh, because the dress is very like boobs. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and they're like, well, if I get top surgery, like, how's that gonna affect this? Like, will
Mm.
I have to like redo this, or am I gonna try and build this in a way that I can adjust the clothing later? And
Yeah. Yeah. No, the boob centricity of so much clothing is a real problem. Even for people like, I don't know. Like, yeah, I'm like, why do all dresses have to assume that the person wearing them is gonna have boobs? Like, that's just unrealistic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually have a bit of a problem on the other side. So because I am a bit taller with broad shoulders and a small chest, if
Mm,
I try to wear feminine clothes that take into account that I'm a bit chubby too, they assume I have big boobs. They assume you're
right.
chubby all over. And I'm like, no, these are still fairly small comparatively.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Either that
absolutely.
or they're really
That's so
short.
frustrating.
That
Right.
is the
Yeah.
advantage to wearing men's clothing, at least, is that
Mm,
it makes some account for a little bit of weight in your chest, but not a ton.
right. Yeah. And then probably would also account for broader shoulders.
Yeah. So that's worked out for me in that way. But like, yeah, anytime I would try to buy feminine clothing or anything with a female cut, I'd be like, there's so much space in the chest.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I've never like, I've more so had the problem of overfilling like bust allowances, but
And then your shirt's too short in the front because they're not.
well, yeah. Or like the thing that fits me everywhere else just doesn't fit me because the size of my chest. And I just, yeah, that's like one part of gendered clothing that one of the many parts of gendered clothing that I find so ridiculous. Like, why are you assuming that everyone's going to be within a specific size range in this one specific area?
Yeah, definitely. And this is definitely a tangent, but I feel like people would enjoy this story.
Okay, go for it.
Years ago, I went to a store and I found a t-shirt that said, "If you think I'm a bitch, you should meet my mom." So I bought it as a gift for my mother. And then, like, my mother's not particularly, like, I feel like my mom's average and she couldn't
Right.
fit it over her boobs. And she turns around and she's like, "You can wear it." She's like, "It's still accurate." I was like, "Oh my God, mom." Okay. I'm glad you still enjoy your gift that didn't fit over your chest.
Uh, that's funny.
But yeah, also congratulations on getting your top surgery, and hopefully it comes quick. And we have
Thank
doctors
you.
in Nova Scotia now, so
Yes. Yeah. It is very exciting. My doctor, it was actually cute when I told my doctor that I wanted to get top surgery. He was like, it was like just the whole process has taken a ridiculous amount of time,
yeah,
which is frustrating. But so this was like back when it had just recently, like very recently, like within the last couple of years, been that there were doctors in Nova Scotia doing top surgeries. And so when I told my doctor that I wanted one, he was like, "Oh, I've got great news for you. Like we finally have doctors here now that can do it." And so he was like really stoked for me and it still took like 2 years, but here we are
yeah.
moving forward.
I've always thought it was funny that we had to go to Montreal to get stuff covered because, like, I came
Yeah.
from New Brunswick and I asked my New Brunswick doctor if I had to go get surgery in Montreal, if there's any reason, like,
Hmm.
a doctor who does chest reduction on men couldn't do it. And he's like, no, there's absolutely no reason. It's the same thing. And I was like, okay, so I can just like pay a doctor here to do it if I can find someone because New Brunswick wasn't covering it at that point anyway.
Right. Oh,
Yeah,
also,
so
yeah, fucked up and wild that that wasn't covered.
they weren't covering anything. This was like over a decade ago.
Right. Sometimes I forget how recent all this stuff is. Well, even like, yeah, like we were just saying, like the fact that it's only been within the last, like, I think 5 years that there have been doctors in Nova Scotia who will do top surgery is like wild to me. Because it's like there's definitely a lot of plastic surgeons and like mastectomies are a common thing.
Yeah, it's not a
Um,
specialty surgery. It's just
yeah,
because it's trans, it's suddenly specialty.
yeah. It's like something that doctors have to be willing to do rather than like, oh, this is just a procedure that should be open to anyone.
Yeah, at least you have the experience as a sewist to be able to like hem your shirts. Hem, is that the correct word? Take the seam allowance in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that like your top
Yeah.
part will be more accurate to what your body will be.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely very excited to kind of like explore that change in my approach to sewing clothing. And we'll probably, I'm like sort of formulating an ongoing art project that I want to do to kind of like follow along the process.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Don't ask me too many questions because it's very like unformed. It's like an unformed piece of clay in my brain that I'm just like, interesting.
I'm just saying, when you like get into it and you start doing it, hit me up and we'll do like a follow-up episode.
Okay. Yeah, that would actually be so helpful because I'm not always I'm trying to be better at sort of like documenting and getting into my process of making stuff and like writing down my thoughts as I do it, rather than just like making a thing and then someone asks me what it's about. And then I'm just like, I don't know, it's a thing, it's something, when I know that I have had lots of kind of thoughts and feelings about it throughout the process. And so having a kind of a deadline or something to, a reason to record things would be helpful, I think.
Yeah, it's just kind of like at the end of it when people ask, it's like, oh crap, I've been put on the spot. I didn't think I'd have to remember these things.
Right, exactly. It's like the like if you've ever put a piece of art in a gallery show or like any kind of showcase and then you have to write like an artist statement about it. And it's just like, what words? Hello?
It's just like, it's pretty. I
It's
don't.
like I used this color because I liked it.
Yeah, I haven't done anything for an art thing, but that's basically how I feel. Anytime somebody asks me to introduce myself in like a work meeting or I have to do a bio or something, I'm like, I don't know. Here's my name, my pronouns, my job. Like, what else do you want?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, it's a funny and difficult process and yeah, always feels a bit like being put on the spot.
Yeah, because it's just kind of like, oh, I just thought you would like look at it, not get in deep.
Yeah, like doing I did some like fine arts classes in university and doing the critiques was always like such a bizarre experience of like, oh, I have to now talk about this in front of all of these people. What?
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Next question is, do you feel like your art or the doing of your art interplays with your gender or gender expression? Example, many fiber arts have a social
Mm.
identity as being for women, either through the fact that they were domestic practices or it was something that was a higher class woman's pastime.
So the yeah, like the interaction between me and then a craft that is typically considered gendered. Yeah, it's an interesting one because I wish there wasn't such a stereotype around it and it just seems again very arbitrary and just not representative. But I also think there's very something very powerful about the fact that it has primarily been women, and I would argue also queer people. Like, I think the fact that there's an entire podcast of people who are non-binary slash and or queer fiber artists speaks to how important queer people are in fiber arts as a whole. I think I would like I can't cite this because I don't think there's been research done on it, but that is my sense based on what I've seen and my own experiences in the fiber world. So I think there's something really powerful in that. And in making my art, I do feel some way connected to my ancestors. Like and this I think was something else with weaving was like, oh yeah, this is connected to a legacy of like no one who I know in my like a family who I can like trace back was a weaver, but you know, there is like a legacy there and a tradition there. And I think connecting to that is a really important part of why I love fiber crafts. And yeah, the like the power of the place that women and queer people have played in continuing that is really cool. And yeah, but then it's hard to hold that feeling and then also recognize, okay, but there's still a lot of harm being done by how it's kind of being gate kept a little bit, or there's like all these weird stereotypes about like, yeah, who is going to be assumed to be in a knitting group, for example, or like so it's like I kind of hold the two things. And sorry, that was like two tangents in one.
I mean, obviously, we love a tangent on this podcast, so no worries at all. But yeah, you were asking about, you weren't sure if there was research done on queerness and fiber arts, and I swear to
Yeah.
God, I have a book bookmarked somewhere
Oh
that
my
I want to
God.
buy. So if I can find it, I will send it to
Yes.
you because there was a book that I found that was about like the history of like fiber arts in queerness. And I know there was one for
Hmm.
sure about like, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like fiber arts and activism. And I'm sure there's got to be
Mm.
something in there about
Hmm.
like queer activism. So
Right. Yeah. Well, that's another really cool overlap of the fiber world is the activism aspect of it.
it's really fascinating because like so much fiber arts is done in the house too, in that
Hmm.
domestic atmosphere that I feel like
Yeah.
people don't think of it as coming out and being a thing that people push with.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And that makes me think of like a lot of times whenever knit in public, because that's really the only craft that I do consistently that I bring places, is people always ask me about it. It always becomes a point of connection. And I think that sometimes it's annoying because I'm like, please don't talk to me. I'm counting my stitches. But it's also really beautiful that people, for some reason, they see what you're doing and they feel comfortable to like to say hi, or maybe they're like also a fiber crafter, or they'll like tell you a story about their grandmother who was. And it's like, I don't know, I think there's something really nice about that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've had a few people who come up to me and they're like, "Oh, my mom used to do this or my grandmother used to do this." And I'm
Yeah.
like it that's a lovely little story. But also, yeah, sometimes
Mhm.
just like I'm busy.
Yeah.
No, just like what you were saying about like its history as being something that's like so connected to women too. And but
Mhm.
it's weird because when you think about it, or not, I guess when you think about it, but when you like dip into the history sometimes, you end up finding that some of these things like were very common amongst men. So like
Right.
working on netting and stuff like that.
Yeah, true. So true.
Because the fishermen
Hmm.
would have had to repair their shit while they were on the boats themselves. They couldn't wait till they got home and got
Right.
the woman to do it.
Yeah, no, true. I feel like, yeah, the way, I don't know, the way history unravels and likes to put things in such stark categories when in reality it is so much more nuanced. And I think, yeah, just a lot of stories get lost when that happens, when, because then you lose out on the stories of all of the men who were doing fiber related crafts. Also, I would like to make an argument that woodworking is a fiber craft. So anyone who does woodworking or carpentry is actually a fiber artist. So then, yeah, just blow the whole, like, just no gender categories for the things that we make, please.
100% because there's no reason that, I shouldn't be able to do several different things in different categories without people being weird about it.
Yeah, exactly. And like the point that you brought up too about the necessity of fishermen having to repair their nets or traps, or even, sailors having to repair sails, those like, or like, I love, one of my favorite knitting traditions is the like traditional fisherman jumper. I'm convinced I'm going to make myself one day. But I also imagine like any fisherman who is wearing one would also know how to mend it. You like, you tear a hole in it, you're going to sew it up. You're not going to like leave it gaping open to tear more and more. Like, this is a essential part of your working uniform. You're going to take care of it. And like the necessity and survival aspect of a lot of fiber crafts is really lost on a lot of people, I think. And that's something that really fascinates me about it. Is like, yes, everyone would have had to know how to do this because it was essential to survival. And that is, that's like coming back to that like human element of it, of we're all humans that need to survive somehow, and so we're going to have to learn these skills, and separating them by gender just makes it worse for everyone.
Right? Like the idea that men should never sew, so then like your husband's coming to you to sew on a button. It's like, my love,
Yeah.
this is something we can learn. Like this is pretty easy.
Yeah, exactly.
And like putting that as a gendered thing, it's a button. Like, really, are we going to be upset about this?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. And like, yeah, like have the skills that you want to have, and learn the things that you want to learn. Not that everyone needs to learn how to sew on a button, but like it's really handy. And yeah,
Yeah.
just thinking of it in a gendered way rather than like learn to sew on a button if you own buttoned clothing is, yeah, I think a more accurate way of looking at it.
Yeah, my mom's dad passed away last year. I had to think
Hmm,
about what year we're in.
fair.
But my mom gave me, this is a man who was born in the 1920s. Yeah, he was like 92, 93, so he would have been born
Okay.
in the 1930s, I guess.
Okay.
And my mom just came to me with this package of needles that he had. And she's like, "Hey, I don't know if these would be useful to you because I'm pretty sure these needles were for canvas or something or leather. Like they're thick needles and like there's a big curved one, so
Hmm.
maybe upholstery or something. It doesn't say on the package." And she's like,
Cool.
"Do you want these? Are they useful?" And it's like, "I'm never going to use them, but it's so cool that like my grampy
Yeah.
had them, so I keep them in my like room regardless."
That is so cool. Have you like researched and tried to figure out what they might have been used for?
I'm pretty sure that the curved one is an upholstery needle so that you didn't have to
Right. That
like,
would make sense. Yeah.
yeah, like when you're patching something that's already been finished.
Hmm.
Because it also just makes sense that like it's my black grandfather, so he would not have
Mm.
been in a position of economic prosperity to be able to just afford to throw things out.
Right. Yeah.
Also, he would have come from a time frame where people were expected to repair their things anyway back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, more than
Hmm.
now.
Totally.
Yeah, so like I'm pretty sure that's what that needle's for. I'm not sure about the other one. I'm thinking canvas, but I haven't looked it up yet.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
huge though.
Interesting. Yeah. That's so cool. I love that you have that.
Yeah, I just thought it was so neat that this was something like my grandfather carried around and used, even though, like I said, it only came with those two needles. They weren't exactly everyday things that you would fix in your house. At
Hmm.
some point, the other needles got lost, but it's just kind of like, Grampy, when's the last time you used these? And you still have them just in case. Like, it's the survival
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah. That they would have been, yeah, like you said, obviously not everyday tools, but tools that he would have used on a regular enough basis to warrant keeping them around.
Exactly. Like, they were important enough that if something happened, they needed to be here.
Yeah. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, Gramps was pretty cool. So let's go on to the next question and ask you what inspires you to make the things that you make.
Yeah, what inspires me to make the things that I make? Yeah, I think a lot of the things I've already talked about in terms of sort of the like personal expression, flexibility in terms of garment making are definitely big as like inspirational kind of motivators. But I think in terms of like getting new ideas, color definitely inspires me a lot. I love being out in nature, which is such like, I don't know, I feel funny saying that. What does that even mean? But just being around like different natural landscapes and seeing the different colors and textures, I find really inspiring and also just very like soothing. So I think that's part of it too, is it's easier to feel inspired in kind of a soothing natural environment. And then, yeah, color, nature, and I think just like enjoying playing, like I enjoy playing around and like the sense of doing something is really, really satisfying, even if there isn't like a clear end result that I'm going for. Just playing around is also something I do a lot. And that I think generates a lot of ideas. And then I kind of take that and go elsewhere.
Is that the playing around? Is that why you are like getting more into the freeform knitting idea?
Yeah. And my friend who and coworker, she also works at the at Sisterhood Fibers. She was like, "You got to start freehand knitting." She was like, "Yeah, you just pick some yarn and cast on some stitches and then you do a bit of a pattern and then you." And I was like, she's like a very like extremely talented, experienced knitter. And she was just like, "Yeah." And so at first I was like, excuse me, obviously no, like that sounds wildly intimidating. But I've been kind of thinking about it and like I'm like, why not? Why can't I just cast on a random number of stitches and go for it? But or just like kind of like loosely draft a pattern and see if I can follow it. Like, yeah, just kind of seeing like I think something that keeps me inspired is like always trying to do something that I'm not very good at yet. So like with the free form knitting, it's like I'm pretty confident following a pattern, you know, all those sorts of things that go with that. But then to free form is like incredibly intimidating, but I think but it's also kind of exciting. So it's like that aspect of, oh, what's something I haven't tried with this yet? Let's see what that's like. And that kind of motivates me to keep doing my craft and keep learning new things. So that's definitely a source of inspiration.
So, what kind of things do you think you're going to try freeforming? Because, like, in my mind, I'm thinking, like a scarf would be a good start because who cares how wide or thick it is? You can wrap it extra times. But then also,
Mm-hmm.
like, freeforming a sweater would be great because you're just do the increases, do the decreases, try it on. Oh, it doesn't fit. Pull it out, do it again, like, you don't have to sit there and think too hard on it.
Yeah, definitely. Like, yeah, I was definitely thinking of trying a scarf with some hand spun yarn because again, it's like, I'm not a very good spinner. It's very inconsistent yarn. Following a pattern isn't really going to make sense because I won't be able to. So I might just freeform something with that and see what happens. And then, yeah, I kind of like the idea of trying to freeform a sweater or like some kind of top where it's just like cast on enough stitches so it fits and then keep going and like you said like decrease here increase here and then kind of it sounds It sounds impossible when I say it, but I'm like, I know realistically that it is possible. I just have to try it.
I mean, honestly, this is how like some designers are out there doing this stuff. They're not doing a whole bunch of math. They're just trying things and ripping them out and redoing them.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like, it's not completely untreaded territory. Other people are doing it successfully, so why can't you?
Yeah.
Tell us about the favorite thing you've made so far, no matter what it is. And because that is a
Mm.
hard question to answer sometimes, especially when you have multiple different fiber options, go ahead and like do multiples if you want. Maybe do one of like each of your arts.
Mm. Yeah. One of each. I may not have one of each, but I definitely the lace knitting project I talked about earlier, I think was definitely my favorite knitted thing so far. I was very, very pleased with that. And again, it was something that was very new to me. So learning how to do lace knitting was quite fun and exciting. But I think my favorite kind of generally was this piece that I wove. I actually have it now. I can show you if are you able to see me? Does this make
Yeah, it's just
sense?
my
Okay.
side doesn't show to you.
Okay.
It looks so squishy.
The lighting's terrible, but yeah, this is okay, I don't think this is helping at all. But then yeah, so it's this sort of scarf length, scarf width piece of fabric that is made entirely of yarn that was either hand dyed, hand spun, or both. And that all the dyeing was done with natural dyes, with things that I could collect from my immediate environment. And I wove it into this piece that is the outside of this project. It took me like almost 3 years. Yeah, because it was right after I learned how to weave that I started this project because I was like, I want to do this thing where I spin and dye and weave all the yarn. And turns out that is an incredibly labor intensive process and takes years, even to get something that's like, just a very average sized scarf. But it was really fun and I learned a lot and it really pushed me to practice my different skills of spinning and weaving. And yeah, it was just a really cool process to go through. And I really like the final result. And yeah.
Do you want to tell us like what it was dyed with? What different materials you used?
Yes. Okay. So I have some alpaca wool that was gifted to me that I dyed with onion skins and coreopsis, which is it's a type of flower there's like a dyer's coreopsis, so it's grown specifically for dyeing. And I bought it from a local farm, Colorful Acres, I think. I'm not sure if they're still producing. Yeah. So the alpaca with the onion skins and coreopsis. I have some hands. No, this wasn't hand spun. It was mill spun yarn that I bought from a local farm that I dyed with grape juice. And I split that skein, did some with grape juice, some with avocado bits. I can't remember if I used the pits or the skins or both, but avocado. There's some hand dyed, not by me, Angora that was given to me that I then hand spun. And oh yeah, and then I also there's some hand spun Corriedale dyed with Coreopsis, and then I included a bit of the yarn that I had spun during the spinning workshop because you like actually spin a skein of yarn. So I included a bit of that, and I can't remember what type of fiber it was, but it's this like I left some of it I dyed with I think yeah with Coreopsis, and then some of it I just left natural. So it's like this nice gray and brown sort of mix of natural fiber, which is nice because then there's like a little bit of the sheep in there too.
That sounds like absolutely lovely. And you have so many different things all mixed into that.
Yeah, it's a whole bunch of different fibers, a whole bunch of different dyes. Yeah, as I was listing out, I was like, no wonder it took me so long to do all of this. Oh dear.
Yeah, really. I mean, coreopsis flowers and then getting enough avocado pieces and enough onion skins.
Mm,
And especially for how
yeah.
big that's not exactly small, So you would have had to have a good amount of onion skins and stuff. So unless you're a family that eats a lot or you're like gathering from your friends and stuff.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because the process to collect the onion skins was I think it was about a year worth of onion skins that I used to dye this yarn. So I guess it had to take me that long. Yeah, I just slowly saved them up and gathered them for about a year until I had enough because I actually had started warping the loom with this project, realized I didn't have enough yarn to warp it to the length that I was kind of hoping for. So then I had to do a last minute emergency dyeing session to get the rest of the yarn that I needed for the warp.
At
So
least you finally
yeah.
got there in the end.
Yeah. 3 years later.
Have you gotten a chance to try it? Has it been chilly enough up there?
I've worn it. I've worn it a couple of times. Yeah, I should wear it more actually.
I mean, you put all that work into it. You should show it off every chance you get, right?
This is true.
So, are there any other favorites you want to mention?
I think this kind of takes the cake for favorites. Actually, an honorable mention as a favorite for sewing was which features my lovely grandmother after she passed about 6 or 7 years ago. And a few years after she had passed, I asked my grandfather if I could, because she was an avid sewer, knitter, did like all the fiber things, to go if I could have a look through her fabric collection. And I found a partially finished outfit
Hmm.
made out of the most like amazing 80s print fabric. It was like this dark blue with bright purple and teal swirly patterns all over it. It was amazing. All the pieces were cut out.
It sounds like an arcade floor.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And it was like pants and this little like vest t-shirt thing. And all the pieces were cut out, but it was only partially sewn together and the pattern was there. So obviously I took all of it. I was like, absolutely, I'm taking this. And so I finished it and it was actually like slightly too small because my grandmother was like quite a petite woman, but they were kind of like oversized pants, so they fit. And so I finished the outfit and I've worn it. The pants more so than the top, and I only occasionally wear them both together because it's a lot. That to have two articles of clothing in that pattern together is a lot, but it's kind of fun.
That's fair. But it's so nice that you get to wear something that like your grandmother worked on and then you worked on. So this is the same grandmother who taught you to knit then, eh?
Yes. Yeah. Another
So another collaboration.
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, she'd be so happy to know that, that got finished up and that it's actually being used, I bet.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so.
I mean, I hope she's not the kind of person who would have been like, that's mine. What are you doing, child?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, no. But I would have loved to see her wear it too, because she would have rocked
Yeah,
it.
that's fair. I mean, she was intending to wear that top with that pants.
Yeah.
I'm assuming so.
Yeah, she had style.
Okay, so that's the end of my questions. And I just want to ask
Okay.
if there's anything you wanted to bring up that like we touched on, but you want to go more in depth in, or something like we didn't get to, or anything like that.
I can't think of anything. I feel like we went on a lot of tangents.
Yeah.
A lot of good tangents were had in the course of this interview, I think. Yeah.
Okay, no problem then. So I lied. One last question. Where can
Okay.
people find you on the internet?
So I somewhat exist on Instagram. I'm not like super active or anything, but Annie Rose, all one word, ANNIROSE dot art on Instagram. I occasionally post photos of things that I make. Sometimes it's photos of my cats, sometimes it's photos of a nice sunset. It's kind of a mixed bag, but hoping to post more art and be more consistent with like documenting it and putting it out there because I enjoy seeing other people's art. So I'm like, hey, someone might enjoy seeing this.
Yeah, when you start your project, the one about your top surgery you were talking about, are you going to be posting it
Oh,
there? Or will you make a new account, you think?
oh, it'll definitely go on my personal. It's definitely not going to be a big enough project to warrant its own Instagram account, but it will. I guess I have to do this now. I've
Yeah,
spoken it into the universe, so it must happen.
you're going to be held accountable. So,
But honestly, I need a little bit of that when it comes to art making because then it'll be 3 years later and I'll just
yeah,
finally have a scarf.
fair enough. I completely understand that. I'm terrible for posting to my own too. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and
Thank you for having
listeners.
me.
Oh, glad to have you. Listeners, if you'd like to find FiberMB on the internet, it's at Instagram, username FiberMB. F like Frank, I, B like Bob, E, R, E, N like Nancy, B like Bob, Y. If you want to email me, same thing, fibermb@gmail.com. There's a link tree in the bio of the Instagram, or you can type it in, linktr period EE/FiberMB. And on there, you'll find submission forms for either submitting for yourself or suggesting somebody else you would like to hear on the podcast. And if you are interested in dropping a tip in the coffee to help me run this, it's ko-fi.com/fibermb. And look forward to seeing everybody in the next episode. Thanks again, Annie.
Thank you so much.